And now we go over to our panel and our moderator, Tom Taylor, who you've already met. If you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. Do not unmute. And I will direct your questions to Tom. Take it away, Tom.
Okay, well, tonight we have a special treat for everyone. We have 4 panelists who have all been published and know about the publishing business, how to go about it. Wendy Hawkin, Shane Joseph, and Nate Hendley is here. And I'm Tom Taylor. So what I want to do is they're going to tell you a little bit about their path to publishing, and then we're going to come back for questions. So maybe we'll start with Wendy, and then go to Nate, and save the publisher himself, Shane Joseph, for cleanup hitting. So Wendy, do you want to unmute yourself? And there we go. Take it away.
Take it away. Hi, thank you very much for inviting me, since I am out in Vancouver and I'm not in the East End at all. And but I really appreciate being invited to this celebration. So great. I am an indie author publisher, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. And just to make it a little bit easier for you guys, I sent out 2 blogs in the last week where I outlined my foray into being an indie publisher. So there's a part 1 and a part 2 where I kind of break down how I got into all of this, and because it's had many evolutions. But I started around 2010 by coming out with a book called To Charm a Killer, and a pen name called Kara Reed, which I wouldn't tell anybody what it was, because I was teaching high school and I write really sexy, edgy books, and I didn't want to get busted. So I was, in a high school situation where people say, I wrote a book, I was teaching English, I wrote a book, it's like, oh, what is it? What is it? I can't tell you. So I'm just going to tell you that's a really, really bad plan for marketing. That doesn't work really well. Okay. So I did, in fact, go back out. When I came out in 2016, I used my real name. So I'm now using my real name when I publish and market, now that I'm not teaching anymore. So I don't know how much you want me to explain, or if you want to have questions.
Well,
or...
I guess what you could do is just tell us on your first book, or maybe your second, because it sounds like the first one was a learning experience, but maybe the second, what was the process you went through to be published?
Okay. So, well, with the first one's actually had about 3 or 4 go rounds already. So the first one started out, as I said, with a pen name. And then I actually sat down with Shane, and because I knew him a little bit, and said, I'd like to do this. So the second time I published it, Shane did all the formatting for me with Blue Denim Press and helped me with the cover. And we went through that whole process. And then he sent me all the files. And when I had the sequel to that, I was like, okay, I have been doing desktop publishing for like 20 years. I'm pretty good with IT. I think I can figure this out. So I ended up like taking I did this, Shane. Okay. I took his Word file and I took my own document, and I'm like, I can figure this out. And I went through that whole process, and I started formatting for myself. And then I went through the process of getting Blue Haven Press, who is my indie publishing company, and I started putting them out. So I had To Charm a Killer, and then I had To Sleep with Stones, and then I wrote a third one and decided I needed to have a trilogy. So then I got all new covers and put them all out as a trilogy. And that was a whole other experience. And then the last thing was I wrote a fourth one. I just just happens, these things. And so I did all new covers again, and I put them out as the tattoo editions. And so every time I go through and I create a new series, I go through and I reformat everything and put them out.
When you say put them out, what do you mean? What's that process? Are these ebooks,
Sure.
print books? What are they?
They're both. So I do print books through Ingram Spark, and I upload PDFs for that. And I do ebooks, EPUBs. At this point, I'm using Draft to Digital because I really, really like them. They're author friendly. And then I do Mobies for Kindle and put that onto Amazon. So I do that all on my own. Yeah. And I work with the cover designer. And just recently, now the one thing I was not doing was marketing. And as everybody is going to tell you here on this publishing panel, if you don't do marketing, you're not going to get anywhere. And I'm an introvert. I know you guys don't believe me about this, but it's true. And I'm an introvert. And so marketing is really, really hard for me. But I really, lately in the last month, 5 or 6 weeks, I did sign a contract with a publicity person, Creative Edge, and he's fantastic. And I have been marketing like mad. So I'm doing TV and radio spots and all kinds of blogs, and I run Amazon ads, and I've just really, I have a pretty decent website, which I have to update all the time. And that, so the thing about being an indie publisher, which I think is different than other ways of doing this, is that I am it. Okay, I do everything. And it's pretty exhausting because I also have another part-time job to pay for it, because you're not going to make a ton of money doing this unless you happen to be one of those lucky indie publishers that suddenly comes up with the magic. I don't know what it is. These ones that are making 6 figures you hear on Kindle and winning all these awards. And I'm not sure how they're doing that yet.
Yeah.
But
when you say draft to
that.
digital, when you say draft to digital, what do you mean for the people listening here tonight?
Sure. Draft to Digital is a platform, and you take your manuscript and you can go on there for free and you can upload your manuscript. It's really user friendly, and you can use different themes, and you can see your book and see what it looks like. And they will also, I believe now, turn your book into a print book as well.
Okay.
So of the platforms out there, that one for me has been the easiest one to use. They take a chunk of a percentage when you actually sell. Okay, which is different because Ingram Spark has an upfront fee that you have to pay for print book. So if I'm uploading a whole PDF file to Ingram Spark and my covers and everything, I have to pay, it's $49 US for a print book or a print in an ebook. However, they often have freebies. So if you're not like in a big push on to get it out at that moment, if you can wait, they will often have times where it's like, okay, we'll have it free for the next 3 months, and then you can upload for free, and they don't take a cut.
Okay. Nate, do you want to give us your experience with the publishing world and how some of our viewers might get published?
Sure. My name is Nate. As Thomas just said, I'm a Toronto-based journalist and nonfiction author. I've written 14 books, primarily in the true crime genre. I have some insights on how to get a nonfiction book published. I have no idea how to get a fiction book published, so I'm not going to talk about that. Main points: hard work, focus, good idea, thick skin, and luck. In my experience, luck has largely meant being aware of opportunities and taking advantage of them. So you need an idea, track record, and opportunity, as said. If you do nonfiction, you don't have to write the whole book before you try to get it published. In fact, most publishers don't want you to write the whole book. They just want the idea, okay? The idea obviously should be original or catchy. A different view of a subject that's been written about multiple times is also a good idea. You have to put the idea down in writing. Put together a one-page synopsis of your idea and why it would make a good book. This is called a pitch letter. You also have to explain why you are the ideal person to write this book. Having a track record helps. And by track record, I mean a history of published articles. If you've never published anything before, or even on a blog, your chances of getting a nonfiction book deal are slim to none. Unless you are already a well-known, much published writer or have the greatest idea for a book, excuse me, for a unique book, do not expect a quick response from a publishing house. Publishers are inundated with book proposals, sometimes take weeks to get back to you, if at all. As I had mentioned, in nonfiction, you typically don't write the book before you contact the publishing house, unlike fiction where you typically write the book, then try to get it published, okay? Also, in nonfiction, you typically don't need an agent. There are some nonfiction authors who have agents, but they tend to be the very high up, mucky mucks, okay? You want to check for contact, and you want to include contact information on your pitch letter. I used to be an editor at a publication that would receive pitches for story ideas, and the people wouldn't include their contact info. So it's like, great idea, how do I get in touch with you? This is in the pre-email days. If you live in Canada and your idea covers a Canadian topic, it is always best to hit up a Canadian publisher. Sorry to say, most American publishers aren't very interested in Canadian ideas. Go online, do a little research, find out who's publishing Canadian nonfiction, find out who the publishers and the editors are at these companies. Some publishing houses actually have an entire web page on how to submit a story idea to them, book proposal. So read those instructions carefully. If the publishing house likes your idea, they will probably be in touch with you and ask you to write a chapter outline. This is to determine if there's enough meat to warrant an entire book about your idea. Keep the outline brief. Do not submit a 300-page account of what you want to write about. Few pages summarizing your main points are enough. Also include points about how you're going to do your research and where. If the publishing house likes your chapter outline, they'll send you a contract to look over. Contract contains information about word count. They're very fussy about that. They want 60,000 words. They want it more or less 60,000 words, okay? If you submit 10,000, they're going to reject your book. 100,000, they'll reject your book. Deadline and payment. Payment comes in the form of advance payments, usually done when you sign the contract or submit the manuscript, and royalties. Royalties are basically a percentage based on the sales price of the book in print and ebook format. Read the contract carefully. You might want to get a lawyer to look at it if you can afford it. Don't sign anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. Once your contract is signed, you can commence writing. And once you finish the book, there's going to be a long back and forth process with the publishing house as they edit and analyze your manuscript. If you're lucky, they won't demand extensive rewrites. Now, a quick little sidebar, my story. I had always wanted to write a book ever since I was young. I'd always envisioned writing novels. I wrote a bunch of novels when I was younger. They all terrible. I still wanted to write a book into my 20s and 30s. As it happened, I belonged to a writer organization that gave out emails on a listserv. They had a notice that an Alberta-based publisher that specialized in short, punchy Canadian history books, Burton Light, as I called them, was expanding eastward, the opposite trajectory of most publishing houses, and was looking for Ontario or Toronto-based nonfiction stories. At the time, a notorious Toronto bank robber named Edwin Alonzo Boyd had just died. His death made the front page of the newspapers. Back in the early 1950s, Boyd headed up something called the Boyd Gang. They robbed banks at a time when Toronto had a reputation for being dreary dull and very safe. I was a journalist, so I knew how to do pitch letters. I put together a pitch to the publisher, explained my experience as a journalist, explained the significance of Edwin Boyd. They liked the idea. I wrote a chapter outline. I got a contract. Lo and behold, the book was published in 2003, entitled Edwin Alonzo Boyd, The Life and Crimes of Canada's Master Bank Robber. So to sum up, my idea was a book about Edwin Alonzo Boyd. My track record was the hundreds of pieces of journalism I published. And the opportunity was noticing an email from a post from a writers group I belonged to. The publisher liked the book. It sold reasonably well. They asked me to write another one. Snowball became avalanche, and I just kept writing more and more true crime. My latest book, The Beetle Bandit, will be released later this year by Dundurn Press. It's about Matthew Carey Smith, an intelligent but troubled young man who robbed a bank in North York in 1964 wearing a Halloween mask and a beetle wig. He shot and killed a patron who tried to intervene. He was later captured and convicted and became one of the last people in Canada to be sentenced to death. His case inspired a nationwide debate about gun control, insanity defense, and capital punishment. Very, very quick comments. Once your book is published, your work is not done. You've got to promote it, because most publishers don't do a huge amount of promotion, except unless you're like Stephen King or a very big writer. It helps to do your own promotion, and you can do a lot of this very cheaply on social media. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. Promote the hell out of your book. Include a link to your book of places where people can buy it, and consider doing a blog. Like I said, don't count on the publisher doing all the promo for you. Hopefully you'll get royalties once your book is out on the market, about 10 to 12% royalty on a print book and a little less for ebooks. Register your book with the Public Lending Rights Commission. They go around to libraries in Canada, see if your book is on the shelf, and if it is, they give you free money. I'm not kidding, it's great. I get a check every year from these guys. Do readings if you're up to it. Do readings online and in person. Join writing groups. Don't expect giant sales, I'm sorry to say. I believe 500 copies of a novel is considered a bestseller in Canada, maybe 1,000 copies of a nonfiction book. My website's on at www.natehendley.com. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. You're invited to follow me. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Nate, just before I go over to Shane, I wanted to ask you, without an agent, do you send query letters out to all the publishers that you can find on the internet, or how do you find the publisher? How do you find the acquisition editor if you don't use an agent in nonfiction?
Well, first of all, like sort of to give you sort of the advance, once your foot's in the door, I found that publishers start to come to you. I published a bunch of books with my first publisher, Altitude Publishing, and then an American company, ABC Clio, contacted me and said, hey, do you want to write a crime book on Bonnie and Clyde? I said, sure. So they published me. And then recently I happen to know someone from Dundurn, and they're like, hey, why don't you send us a pitch? So I came up with a story idea and sent them a pitch. So a lot of that was personal contacts. To get your foot in the door in the first place, just do research. Two things. Do a little research. It's a lot of these publishing houses that do nonfiction have very good websites in Canada, be they Dundurn, HarperCollins, Random House, a few others. They'll explain what kind of books they do. They often have tips for writers who want to apply. Study those. And quite often it'll say right on their masthead who the acquisitions editor is. Or it'll say story submissions, email, blah, blah, blah. The second part of that is just personal contacts. It really, really helps to join writer groups, to, contacts. And you don't have to be you don't have to be super sociable to do this. You can be, online or just, if you know people, it really, really, really helps, because publishing world is a small world and publishers like to work with people they know, or people that have a track record. Like, it helps that I was a journalist, so I could say, well, here's some articles I wrote for such and such. And I actually approached a publisher who spoke at I belong to the Professional Writers Association of Canada, and we had a panel on publishing. I just approached one of their top guys and said, oh, well, I write crime books. I've got an idea. And he liked the idea enough that I wrote him a proposal, and they didn't end up using it, but I now have this guy's contact, and he knows me, I know him. So those are the two simple ways of doing it.
Sure. Just a quick thing, because we can do this fast. A question come up. Was that the Public Lending Rights Commission? And is that a Canadian thing?
Yes, it is. I might have, they have changed their name over the years, but if you just Google Public Lending Rights Commission, what you do is you have to get you can register your titles with them. And it takes a while for them to get in for your books to get into their system. But once they do, it's like, I think it's a government organization. I've never really checked into it, but they literally go library to library to see if your book is on the shelf. And then they give you money. It's amazing. Like,
Sounds wonderful.
I'm not pulling anyone's leg. Like, this is totally true. It's like, I got to check every year. And they're like, oh, well, here are your books from the shelf. It's like,
all right. Okay. Well, thank you, Nate, and thank you, Wendy. Now we're coming in for the finale here with Shane. Take it away.
Well, thank you. I've been waiting patiently, and I guess I got to say something about how I came into publishing, right? So I came into publishing the wrong way, I guess, through a series of unfortunate events. I'm really a writer. I really didn't want to do any publishing, but what ended up happening was I had a first career when I was a teenager, a young adult, I guess, or young man. I published a few short stories in my home country, which was Sri Lanka, and I thought maybe I could become a writer. And then, of course, I quickly realized that was not going to work, because I was never going to earn an income. So I ditched the writing career at that point, and I forgot all about it for about 25 years. And that's a big mistake, because that if you're meant to do something, it's going to come back, and it's going to keep bugging you and haunting you and pushing you. And so it pushed me to the point that, I made some life choices. I even quit my big job. I had a big job in a corporation because that was not helping me to write. And I started writing in 2001. I did all the right things. I went to the writing schools. I graduated from the Humber School for Writers. It was a bit of a mistake. I found that the school was really promoting the faculty and not so much the students. So I did that. Then I self-published my first book. I also realized that was a mistake, because back in those days, you were committing suicide if you self-published your first book. Your debut novel is supposed to be something that makes your brand. So then I went and found a small Ontario publisher, and I thought, okay, fine, let me hang my hat on with this guy. And I found out that there was a lot of things that this industry was moving towards. It was moving towards the electronic age, and there were a lot of publishers who were traditional, and they were not willing to embrace ebooks. They still had submissions going by paper in the post, and you had to send your submissions serially. You couldn't submit to many people at the same time. So I figured if I did the math, and I was taking 2 years to hear back from a publisher, and if I had to do this 20 times before I hit one, I'll be 80 years old before I got my first book published. So that was not working either. So after I had 2 more books published through a small publisher, I decided, you know what, I had to own this channel. I was a 21st century writer, not a 20th century writer, where the rules were different. I had to make my own rules, and I had to own the channel. So what does that mean? It means learning how to publish your book. Like Wendy said, learn the technology. I was good at technology. Learn the technology, learn all the angles, and do it yourself. And then I decided, okay, I'm not going to be that self-published writer again. I'm going to also publish other people. I'm going to publish other deserving writers. There must be lots of them like me. And I also met a venerable publisher once at a book fair, and he said to me, there has to be about 100 guys like you doing what you're doing, because then you will restore the middle tier to Canadian publishing, because the publishing world had split between the big guys, a few middle guys, and a whole bunch of people self-publishing. So we needed another strong middle class, if you will, in the publishing business. So I figured this is a good thing to do. So I've been publishing now for the last 11 years. I started with 2 books a year, into 3 books, now up to 4 books. And I'm thinking, should I go to 6? And then I'm pausing and saying, if I go to 6, there's only 24 hours in the day. And I'd like to spend some time with the author, because my contribution to the author is I provide editing, I provide advice, I provide marketing support, I provide spiritual guidance, I provide formatting, cover design, you name it, I do it all. I like to do it everything. So
how about marketing?
I would help them with marketing. I do a lot of stuff on social media. I don't have money to spend on marketing, but I will help them in marketing endeavors. And there's a lot of things you can do today for free if you leverage things correctly. Like, for instance, even in the pandemic, I found out that instead of doing a book launch where I would get 50 or 60 people at a cafe, I could do a Facebook Live, a Zoom type of thing, and I can get 1,000 people to see what I've done. I can make a YouTube video and put it up on YouTube and get another 1,000 people to see it. So suddenly, you're getting all these ideas and saying, let's leverage all these technologies that are out there. So that's what I've been doing, and I love what I'm doing, because I'm using all the talent, the skills that I learned in different things. I was an actor, a musician, a corporate executive. I'm using all those things to be a publisher. And writing alone is no longer giving me a big kick, because that's only one part of it. You sit in a room and you write things. But if you're publishing, you're writing, you're editing, you're doing a lot of things. So that's what I'm at. So I hope that gives you kind of an idea of what I've been doing and why I'm doing it, and why I hope to keep doing it for as long as I can.
And so for our group that's watching, if they want, I know what they're all thinking, how do we get Shane to publish my book? I mean, do you want 50 submissions tonight?
No, I want 50 good submissions. I mean, when I say good, they better be good, because I'm a very discerning reader. If you go to my Goodreads site, you'll see about 600 reviews of books I've reviewed, and I can take stripes off people if I don't like what they're writing. So, if you've got a good book, yeah, I'm absolutely happy to work with you. But if it's a wannabe book, no, I'm not interested.
We have a question on the chat. Have you considered doing audiobooks in addition to other formats?
Yes, I have. However, the cost of audiobooks is going up, because what's happening is there's a skill there too, right? Because you have to get voices, and most of the big companies are now bringing in actors, well-known actors, Tom Cruise, whatever. I can't afford to pay Tom Cruise. So you're getting these voices who are coming in. I could afford to get maybe a male voice and a female voice voicing the parts. The production has to be finished or mastered. It's got to be packaged properly, and it's got to be then sold through the channels that are available for audio. So I think that's a big jump. I'm starting to do it with short stories. I've recorded a few short stories, and I've tested them out on podcasts. And if I can get my arms around it, I will probably go there. Because you're right. I mean, our population base is aging, and our eyes are getting really tired. I was hoping that ebooks would solve that problem, because you can increase the font sizes on tablets. But if even that's a challenge, and audio is the next frontier, then yes, that's an area we need to look at. But I haven't done that more than what I've done so far.
We had a question on chat for Nate. Nate, what is the difference between nonfiction and memoir?
Well, they're pretty closely aligned, although memoir, I would personally define it as memoir is a little more subjective, because you're writing about your own memories and own experiences. And some memoirs are dead on and completely accurate. Others are like, you know, a very interesting interpretation of something that other people might totally disagree with. So nonfiction in general tends to be sort of, you would use the word objective in general to sort of describe that, whereas memoir, a little more subjective. It's supposed to be factual. That's, you know, the same as nonfiction. But like I said, with memoir, you're interpreting things through your sensibilities. So you see this often in memoirs by musicians or politicians. They're giving you their interpretation of a certain event. So they'll talk about, do you remember that 1992 TV debate where I debated this, and I just knocked the floor with him and I just destroyed him. Whereas 99% of the audience thought you lost and did terrible. So you're sort of giving your own interpretation. So that is how I would define the two. A good memoir is objective, in fact, and 100% factual, but
Right.
a lot of the times they aren't.
Right. Thank you. Wendy, we have a question for you. Would you consider trying the traditional route now that you have so many novels out there? I would imagine that would be your next novel, now that you're an experienced writer, and I'm sure the quality of writing has improved from your first novels. Now, if you presented to a HarperCollins or whatever, you might get a different response. Is that something you would consider?
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit because I actually did try, after I put out my first book as an indie author, I continued to go to conferences and speak to agents and editors. So that's another thing that you really want to do all the time. And out here in BC, actually, Surrey International Writers Conference is like one of the best ones going. But I've been told lots of times that when you start a series, after you have one book out in your series or two books out in your series, they don't want to hear about you at all until you have something brand new. So
Yes.
I was in the middle of a series. I had 3 books and I wanted my series. I don't write them out as outlines. I just keep writing them because the muse is with me. So I continued as an indie author doing 4. But since then, I've written a whole other small town romance. And so I've just gone through the process of querying agents for that. And that's a whole other kind of a process where you can be an indie author and you can be working with a traditional publisher, and they call it hybrid. So that's what I'm doing now. So I've just sent out 7 query letters to different people. Now, how you do that is you can look in Canadian writers market to see who's publishing what your genre is, or you can use something called manuscript wish list. Twitter is also a really good place to find out what the agents want. So that's something I just discovered. So I went through all of these different agents and looked at what they wanted. And then I actually had to go to all the agencies' websites and look again, because agents have a thing about moving around. So they'll write something last year and then they're not there anymore.
Yeah.
And they're not looking for that anymore. So you have to like really go and you have to comb through their website and you have to see exactly what they want, and then read their bios. And then I made a document basically with each agent's name and what they were into, like, and my notes were like, where are they? What do they want? What do you have to send them? And why this person? So I knew like, well, that person actually likes this or that, or this person has a soft spot for the Midwest. And I'm writing small towns in the Midwest. So I went that direction. So yes, did I answer that? I think I did.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's really, really great. We have a question for Nate. How do you track down your stories for nonfiction? And is it different from journalism? I guess one life as a journalist, another life as a nonfiction crime writer. What's the difference? How do you track your stories down?
Sure, that's a good question. Well, in the first case, like when I did my very first book, like I said, on Edwin Alonzo Boyd, it was just simply a matter of, coming across this really interesting story at the exact same moment that this publisher was looking for interesting stories from Ontario and Toronto. That would be about Edwin Boyd, the 1950s bank robber, dying. Once you have a reputation, it's very similar to journalism. People start contacting you. There's good and bad to that, because you get a fair amount of cranks who get in touch with, I've got that crime story of the century, and it's some bizarre thing involving lizard people from Saturn or something. So I do get that. But I also had this book I did, Boy on the Bicycle. It's about a wrongful conviction case in Toronto from the 1950s that no one's ever heard of. And it was a chap named Ron Moffat, who was 14, wrongly convicted of murder, 1950s. Very similar case to Stephen Truscott, who was 14, wrongly convicted of murder, small town Ontario, 1950s. Ron had seen a book I wrote about Steve, and he contacted me. He emailed me. He said, very interesting book you did on Stephen Truscott. Same thing happened to me in Toronto, 1959. No one's ever heard of it. So I looked into it. You can examine old newspaper archives through the Toronto Public Library website, discovered he was on the level, and we ended up doing a book together. So he contacted me for that, which was a real honor to be able to tell his story. And most recently, with my recent book, I was doing a presentation, and there was a lawyer in the audience who was just been fascinated with the story about the Beetle Bandit, the bank robber I was mentioning. He grew up in the same neighborhood as this guy robbed, as the bank that this guy robbed. And he approached me and said, hey, can I take you out for a coffee? I want to tell you about the story. So eventually he wore down my resistance, and I went out, we had coffee, and it turned out he was on the level and he had all this material, which was great. So in that way, the process of tracking down stories is very similar to being a journalist. That once your name gets out there, people will contact you. But having said that, it always helps just to have a good radar, read a lot. That really, really, really helps. I do a lot of historic crime writing for the tvo.org website. And a lot of it is like, I'll be reading a book and it'll mention in one line some weird thing that happened in the 1920s. And I'll go, oh, okay, that might be an interesting story. And I'll look it up. I have access to I have a subscription to newspapers.com, which gives you old newspapers. And it's like, voila, wow, a story. I didn't know that. And so things like that come up. I like to do research on stuff that people simply aren't aware of. Very quickly, one of my last TVO pieces was about Ontario a century ago led North America in passing gun control. And it did this largely because of intense prejudice against Italians, that they had this newspaper obsession with Italians shooting each other, and with a lot of racist coverage, and politicians responded by sort of banning foreigners from owning pistol permits. I'd never heard of this.
Wow.
I just sort of came across this by reading one or two lines in a book and wrote an article about it. No one else had ever heard of it. It's like, whoa, okay, that's very strange. There's a question here. I also do, I have old newspapers are just one source. I also have used medical reports, autopsy reports. Court transcripts are brilliant because you can just, you can say, here's what they said in court, and it's a public record, so you're allowed to use it. Police files are excellent if you can get a hold of them. The police are very reluctant to give them to you. Court rulings. Quite often the judge will give like a 20-page ruling. And again, it's on the public record. So you can, say, okay, here's what the judge said about X, Y, Z. So there's a variety of ways to get your information. Long-winded answer.
We got a question for everyone on the panel, which is how many hours a day do each of you spend marketing your books? Now, Shane, you'd have maybe a different answer because you got a lot of books to market, but it maybe start with Wendy. How many hours a day do you spend marketing your books? And while you're at it, tell us if your publicist has been a great help. I've seen a number of questions pass about if this publicist thing works. So could you just expand on that a little?
Yeah, I'm, first of all, not the kind of person who actually charts numbers. So I can tell you that I didn't used to spend hardly any time on marketing. And now I'm forced to spend a lot more time on marketing. I don't know how many hours per day. I just don't work like that. But I do have to sit down and go through. Like today, I spent about 4 hours writing blog interviews. So I had 4 blog interviews come in, then I had to actually sit and answer a whole bunch of questions and then submit them. So those will turn up on somebody's blog. So that's a marketing piece.
Sure.
And I do a whole lot more than I ever did now. It's pretty exhausting. I've been with him since the end of March when I launched my last book. And the first month, because I was coming off a launch, I was spinning because I was doing TV and radio and all kinds of different things that I had to get my shtick together because I had never done it. And so people are asking you questions and you have to come up with answers off the top of your head. And that's a whole other comfort level to get into and to connect with the host and kind of present yourself. So that's a new piece. Is it worth it? For me, it's been so worth it. My publicist is Mickey Mickelson, and he's Creative Edge. He's out of Saskatchewan. He has about 80 authors at this point. So he's a really, really ambitious, creative and wonderful person who's working nonstop. I don't know how he's doing it. And he basically sends me things and he sends them out to everybody. So it's like, here's these things. If you want to do it, then email me back. Or here's a schedule, go on this person's schedule and find a time and book yourself in and let me know when you're going to be on it. So it works like that. And I think it's probably going to take quite a while for it to translate because you have to build momentum when you start marketing. So it's not like, one thing he says is this, that often a publicist will say, oh, you've got a book coming out, pay me zillions of dollars and I'm going to spend the next 6 weeks and I'm going to publish you, or I'm going to get you lots of exposure on the media and your book's going to be great. And he's like, that's not true. That's not going to happen unless you're already somebody who is big and already has it going. But if you're somebody that's starting out, it's kind of a long haul and it takes like 6 months to a year to get any kind of traction or momentum at all, because you're kind of building your brand again, and you're finding out who you are and what people want and who your readership is. So I'm in there for the long haul with this. Like I'll do this forever. And also it was my missing piece, because I am not the person who will phone somebody up and say, hello, I'm an author. Do you think I could be on your show? I won't do that, which is why I wasn't doing anything.
Right.
But if he does it and then he says, hey, Wendy, you're on this show, I'm like, okay. And I
Right.
show up and I do my best work.
Sure.
And
Nate, sorry. Did you want to say something else, Wendy?
No.
Oh, okay. Nate, how many hours a day do you spend marketing?
I spend a few minutes a day doing social media. However, I've got it down to a bit of a science. I have a Word document that I list all my books, and I've got the links to where you can buy them, be it Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, etc., and a little blurb about them. So it's very easy for me to cut and paste. I try to do blog pieces. I'm a bit lazy, so maybe once a week a blog piece. And when I can, I do podcasts and interviews. So if you added it all up, it would be more like a few hours a week.
Sure.
But the social media stuff is very fast, just because I've got it all written in advance, kind of thing. And sometimes I'll sort of, if there's some big event like the anniversary of Bonnie and Clyde's death, I'll put like, I wrote a book about them. Here's my website, blah, blah, blah.
Right, right. Oh, okay, Shane, how often do you, I guess for you, it's more how often do you work with your authors, you know, on marketing and publicity, etc.?
Yeah, I break it out and I see how much I spend on my own writing as a writer and how much I spend as a publisher. And it seems like I spend more time pushing myself as a writer. And it seems like that is the main driver in the indie market or in the small author market, unless you're a brand name where people will buy your book sight unseen. Is the personal contact and the engagement with readers that gets them to buy your book. And so the writer, the author, has to be out there really engaging with their audiences. And you asked me earlier about, you know, if everybody sends me a manuscript, would you like to publish it? You know, I'd love to, but I'd also like to see the potential and the capability of that particular author to go out there and engage with their audiences. Because if they are good marketeers, then I'd really like to do something for them, even if the book is not the best, because sometimes the marketing actually pushes it over the edge. So I think in this market that we're in, the onus is on the author as the lead marketeer of the book. And I, as a publisher, on the other hand, I can support them. Like I can create these events and I can give them, you know, contacts with media people that I know of. And, you know, sometimes putting the two together, my contacts and their contacts, we can create 1 + 1 = 3. But it's really driven by the author. So as a publisher, I'm a support person. As an author, I'm a driver.
And do you publish both fiction and nonfiction?
Yes, I do. In fact, I started publishing only fiction. It was novels and short stories. And then I happened to publish a memoir of somebody's, and it sold more books than my fiction. And I've since started taking on memoirs. I published Sharon's memoir. I find that all of my nonfiction books have certainly outpaced the fiction books that I have published.
Really?
And that's I mean, it's probably a sign of our times. People say that after 2001, after the 9/11 incident, people got shocked into reality. And I think the pandemic is probably throwing them even more into that situation. So real life stories seem to be more interesting now than imaginary ones. We
have a question for everyone. How are publicists paid? Wendy, perhaps you, since you've been working with one, so how are publicists paid? That's the question.
I don't know how all publicists are paid. I know how I pay my publicist, and it's basically a monthly fee with a cap.
Okay. And is that negotiated?
Yes.
Okay. I guess it depends on how much work they're going to do with you and for you. And
yeah, like he doesn't take a cut of anything. It's not like, you know, a management cut or a publisher cut or anything like that. This is actually, he's not there to try and get you a book deal. He's there just to give you opportunities to get yourself out in front of people.
Well, we have been 45 minutes or 15 minutes over. And I wonder, we had a question about getting into libraries. How do indie authors get into libraries? And I know it isn't exactly the question for the panel, but someone said Sharon knows how to do this. So Sharon, if you would mind unmuting yourself and join our panel, it's kind of fitting to bring this full circle and back to you. And do you have some advice on how to get indie books into libraries?
Well, it's a little difficult to a certain extent now because of the pandemic. libraries are closed and they open a bit and then they close no matter what's happening with the pandemic. But I can only speak from my own experience. And of course, I'm going to tally it onto the public lending rights. I have to thank Rosemary McCracken for telling me about that, because I had a couple of my Beyond books were out before I even knew about it. So, you know, they will get your books in the libraries, but also you have to do some work at your end. And I remember with my second Beyond book, I have family in Waterloo and Stratford. And while I was there, I went into the libraries and I talked to the librarians. And when I came home, I did a follow-up and they ordered the book. Now with the Toronto Public Library, I've sort of made a name for myself to a certain extent, because I used to, when there wasn't a pandemic, I used to do writing workshops in several branches of the libraries. Also, running the East End Writers Group at S. Walter Stewart when we were there, that sort of helped a lot too. And so what I do is I talk to librarians. I might email them. Probably now is the best thing is to email them and just see if I can get my book in. Rosemary gave me a really good idea of how she did it with the pandemic, with her latest book, Uncharted Waters. And Rosemary, I don't know if you're here or not, but if you are, the library has got the books in, yours now. So they put the order in. It takes a few months to get the order. But for an indie author, Toronto Public Library does order books that are not published by a trade publisher. And I think if you go to their website, and go to, I think, working with the library, doing business with the library, you'll find something in there of what they're looking for. And I think if you do that, if you have contact with the library, you can certainly talk to them. If you don't, go to the answering help and ask questions. Just email them and get some information. And I think you have to tell them about your book. Now, when you do this little proposal, email to them, whatever you want to call it, you put in what your book's about. It helped with my memoir, for example, that it's set mostly in Toronto. Some of it is set outside Toronto, but there's a lot of history of Toronto in the 50s and the 60s and so on and so forth. So that was a tie-in to Toronto. My other tie-in was I have 3 fiction books in the library. My other tie was I do teach writing workshops at the library. My writing group meets at the library. I have a connection to the library. But even if you're even just a patron, in other words, you borrow books from the library, that can help too. So I think you have to pitch your book. You have to pitch yourself as an author, but they are interested in getting new books. And I think if it's, you wait till it gets published. That's what I did anyway for all of them. You don't pitch it before. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Okay, well, listen, fellow panelists and Sharon, thank you very much for pitching in here tonight. It's been great to listen to you. And I have to say, I've been on a lot of panels over the years, and you guys really, really gave it a special twist tonight. So thank you very much. And I'll pass it over to Kit now to take us home.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, panelists. That was incredible and super informative for me, the aspiring writer that I am. But I will pass it back to Sharon because she's gonna actually bring it all the way home.
Thank you, and I actually am unmuted still. Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming and for listening to us and sharing the panelists. And I enjoyed all the other presenters. It was really an eye-opener for a lot of them. I was almost crying at the end of Brian's, and I said, no, I can't do that. I'm on next, and I'm certainly not supposed to be crying in my presentation. So I think, you can see what our group does. Some of what we do a lot of creative things. Those who are here, who are writers, if you're working on something, if you want to join us, I'm going to give you my email. If you want to email me, I can give you more information about the East End Writers. We meet twice a month on Zoom, and for the time being anyway, it should change a bit when this pandemic, if it ever dies down. But anyway, that would be a good idea, because I find, even for myself, and I learned from the other members in the group, I'm